Well, hello and welcome to session 4 of the public policy model. And this session is titled Descriptive Models of Public Policy Making. Descriptive models of public policy making include the following. 1, the elite model. 2, the group model. 3, the systems model. And then 4, the institutional model. Let's start with the elite model. The elite model may be viewed as the preferences and values of the governing elite. Now, what this means is that the governing elite are those who hold political positions and are in charge of political decision making. These are the elite. The other people who also constitute part of the elite are those who are influential individuals and rich people within society who can influence politicians to do things that they want. The second point is, the model suggests that people are apathetic. And what the model says is that, well, we as people who policy is meant for, we don't care about how they go about making policy. We leave everything to the elite, and we say that the elite should make the policies for us. In actual fact, we'll soon come to the criticism that we are not, after all, apathetic. We do care about the policies that are made for us by the influential people. Then the third point is that it assumes that people are ill-informed about public policy. The elite model believes that we, the masses or ordinary people, do not know about public policy. We have no knowledge about public policy. If we have no information at all about public policy, we don't know the policies that are being formed for us. That is what the elite model believes. It assumes that the elite shapes mass opinion on policy questions. It believes that because we don't know what we want, and because we don't know what policy issues are on table, then everything is left to the elite to shape what we think is good. It assumes that the masses do not shape elite opinion on policy questions. So it thinks that we, the citizens, cannot shape and then direct the content and process of public policy, but that it is only the elite who will direct the content and know the processes they will use to get public policy done for us. It also assumes that public officials merely carry out the policies decided upon by the elite. So those who are supposed to implement policy, these are the bureaucrats, that these bureaucrats do not have a say, they do not even care or do not even know, and they only rely on what the politicians tell them to do, and they simply carry out what they tell them to do. Now, it claims that policies flow downward from elite to masses. So because we don't know what we want, the assumption goes that the policy comes from the elite and comes right down to us, and we are just at the consuming end of the policy process. The next assumption is that it is also believed that policies do not arise from mass demands, that it is what the politicians or the elite want that they just simply push for us, but that the policies they form do not come from the pressure we give them and the things we say we want. The next point is that it is assumed that active elites are subject to relatively little direct influence from apathetic masses. And therefore, because we don't know what we want, and we don't even care what policies come, we are only caring about what they give us to consume, we don't even make effort to influence what they do. The other one is that it also assumes that the elites influence masses more than the masses influence elites. And therefore, those powerful in society are those who influence the less powerful in society. That is what the model believes. So what are the characteristics of this model? The first point is that society is divided into the few who have power and the many who do not have power. And that those who have power are the politicians, the influential people, the rich people. Those who do not have power are those who are ordinary citizens, and they are only passive onlookers for policy to be brought so that they consume the fruits of policy. The next point is only a small number of people allocate value for society. And that means that only the influential, who are only few, they decide what society wants. The next point is that the masses do not decide public policy, and that we ordinary people, because we don't know what we want, we cannot decide on public policy. The next point is that the few who govern are not typical of the masses who are governed. In other words, the characteristics of we ordinary citizens is not like the characteristics of the wealthy and influential in society. The next point is that elites are drawn from the upper socioeconomic strata of the population, meaning that only the upper classes are the people who make the policy. And we who are ordinary citizens do not have a hand in public policy. And therefore, when you come and look at society, it is divided into two. Those who are ordinary people called the masses, and those who are the elite, who are the influential and the decision makers. The last point here, the movement of non-elites to elite positions must be slow to maintain stability and avoid a revolution. Now, what this simply means is that the elites prevent the masses from graduating from the mass class into the elite class. Because if the elite are many, then it will make nonsense of their power. So they want to be few and be influential so that they can dictate what happens to the masses. Now, only non-elites who have accepted the elite consensus can be admitted into governing cycles. So if you want to join them, you must behave and look like them so that you can be accepted into their fold. Elites share consensus on the basic values of social systems and its preservation. So the elites, because they govern society, they have consensus or they have agreement about what society really wants. Public policy does not reflect the demands of the masses. We have already said that. Public policy rather reflects the preferences of the elite. Because the elite decide everything, what is in their mind is what they simply transpose onto the ground as policies and programs for us to consume. Change in public policy will be incremental rather than revolutionary. Anything they are doing for us, they do it and it follows a certain pattern. So there is slight additions to what already exists rather than thinking about a completely new thing that we have never seen, and then they just bring it straight onto the platform and then download for us to consume. Active elites are subject to relatively little direct influence from apathetic masses. We have said that already. Incremental changes permit responses to events that threaten the social system. So if we make changes to our existing template or existing policies, then changes in society will be gradual and it will not lead to the threatening of the survival of the whole social system. The responses cause minimum alteration to the system, meaning that the system will change, but it will change gradually. And therefore, there will be no instability in the changes that we are getting at the end of the day. Elites influence masses more than masses influence elite. A small group is responsible for the formulation of public policy. Popular election and party competition do not allow the masses to govern. And what that simply means is that it is only during election that we come out to make our say or put across our say by deciding who we think should rule us. Apart from that, we don't have any other influence. We don't have any other opportunity to influence what the masses, the elites do. Policy questions are seldom decided through elections. And that is true. Anytime we have policies, it takes a very long time for another election cycle to come. Here in this country, it is 4 years cycle. So if you have an issue now, and it's a policy issue, you cannot talk about it until it comes to election. And even when it is election, it is we only vote on bulk on all the issues, but we don't vote on individual issues. And that is the problem that we also face. So what are the advantages of the elite model? The first point is that it identifies the contribution of specific groups involved in policy formulation and implementation. So it says that because society is divided into two, that is the masses and the elite, they know who make policy and they know who consume the policy results. The second point is that it determines who is responsible for what and what is made applicable to them. So we are responsible just to consume, the others are also making, that is the elite responsible for making the policy. It makes us identify the power blocks in society. And the power blocks in society is that they are the elites who have power and they are sitting up there, and we, the masses, are sitting below them, and we have no power, we have no share. It shows us those who determine who gets what, when, and how. So they decide the policies, and they decide the quantum of services and goods they provide to us. We have no say in that. Then what are the weaknesses of the elite model? The first point is that it is undemocratic, since ordinary people have no say in policy formulation. Now, what it simply means is that since we do not participate in the policy-making process and only few people make for us, then the process is undemocratic. A democratic process is a process where everybody concerned and have a stake in a policy issue sit on the table together to discuss and propose solutions to the problem that we have. It has potential for policy alienation since it is top-down in approach. A top-down approach is that elites who are the powerful sit there without coming down to the roots to see what the people at the grassroots need, and then confer with them, discuss with them, know from them what they want before they provide the policy. They just sit there, think that this is what they want, and provide it for us. And that is a top-down approach. it creates a false impression that elites have consensus. Now, the elites do not have consensus. They don't agree on anything. And there have been instances where we have seen politicians fighting amongst themselves, like we recently saw in Parliament. The opposition side and then the government side were about throwing blows in Parliament. So that tells you that even elites do not have consensus. They disagree on many issues. So it is not true that the elite have consensus on everything. It is not true that the masses are apathetic since they protest some policies perceived as obnoxious. Now, it is not also true that we, the ordinary people, are apathetic. We don't know what we want. We just sit there and then we consume policies. Because there are certain times when they have made policies and we have protested against these policies. A good example was in 1995 when the VAT policy was introduced, and then people of all walks of life turned out onto the streets and protested. There was demonstration everywhere, and it led to 4 deaths. But that helped to refine the policy, the value-added tax, which we now popularly call the VAT. So it is not true that we, the ordinary people, do not know what we want. We are apathetic, and anything they give us, we just simply take. The last point here is, it is also not true that public officials only implement policies. Public officials both implement and then develop policies. Bureaucrats are not implementers alone. They are the cornerstones in every sectoral policy making in this country and elsewhere. Now, we have the group model. The group model proposes that interaction among groups is the central fact of life or politics. Now, what this simply means is that if there is no interaction among people, they will not decide collectively what they want to achieve and what they don't want to achieve. They will not decide collectively what their problems are and the means for solving those problems. The second point is, individuals with common interests band together to press their demands on government. Now, what it means is that there are different groups in society, and these different groups in society come together or propose different ideas for solving societal problems. Interest groups are shared attitude groups that make claims on other groups in society. So if you are an interest group, then you are a group that will make a claim on other groups. For example, the TUC in Ghana can make a claim on the Employer Association of Ghana. A group becomes political if and when it makes a claim on or through a government institution. So, for example, if the TUC is protesting for an increase in the minimum wage, and it makes this petition on the Ministry of Employment and Labor Relations, then their activity is political. Or if they pass it through any other government institution, then their activity is political. But if they just leave it there, they don't keep it to themselves, they don't tell anybody about the problem they have, then their issue is not political. Individuals become important in politics only when they act on behalf or part of group interests. Now, according to the group theory, an individual place in society is only recognized only when he or she is part of a group. If you are not part of the group, nobody recognizes you. The group then becomes the essential bridge between the individual and his government. So it is only when an individual is part of a group does it become active, does it become efficient and effective together with others in fighting for their problems to be addressed. Politics is rarely a struggle among groups to influence public policy. So according to the group model, groups in society struggle among themselves for policy influence. So the political system manages group conflict. And therefore, the role of government is just to sit by, see how these groups struggle, and see which groups emerges as the most powerful group among all the groups. It does this by establishing the rules of the game in the group struggle. And therefore, the role of government is not to propose policy, is not to develop policy. The role of government is to sit by, draw the rules of the game, and watch the group struggle, and we see which group emerges victorious. It arranges compromises and bargains and enforces them. So whichever group emerges the winner or the victor, then the government comes in to set the rules. Okay, you are the winner, these are the policies that you are going to do, you are the losers, and then you must take the loss in good faith. Then public policy at any given point is the equilibrium reached in the group struggle. The equilibrium is determined by the relative influence of the interest group. Now the group equilibrium means that when there is a struggle, there must be an end point. The end point is the point where some groups win and some groups lose. Those who lose must accept their loss. Those who win, then they are the victors. And the victors must be able to implement the policies they have chosen to implement. The next one is changes in the in the reflective influence of any interest group results in changes in public policy. Now, if any group wins and it has a policy position, and at any point in time it feels like changing the policy position, then that changes reflects the policy of the land. Policy then will move in the direction of the group gaining interest. So if any interest group wins in the struggle, that interest group policies or ideas become the policies of the state. Policy also moves away from the group losing influence. So if you were previously the person who has won and your ideas were prevailing, and now this time around with another new struggle you lose, then your issues and policies and proposals become redundant, and then the new victor policies and programs become more important. Now, what are the characteristics of the group model? The first point here is that the model does not explain policy decision making per se. What does this mean? The model does not explain policy decision making per se. Rather, it attempts to analyze the relationship among actors. Now, so the group model talks about the process of making policy, but it also talks about how the different groups within society relate with each other. The actors of group determine the outcomes of policies. So every activity of the groups will determine what the outcomes of the policies are, because it is the set of activities you draw up and how you pursue it to a logical conclusion that will determine the outcomes that you will have. It formulates a complete synthesis of the interaction between the group in a policy environment. So it tells us how the different groups in society relate to each other, how they confer with each other, how they discuss with each other, how they make bargains, how they make concessions. Now, the next one is that groups have special, often conflicting interests. Don't be fooled into thinking that groups have the same ideas. Different groups in society have different ideas, different values, different interests, different anxieties, different hopes, and different aspirations. The influence of groups is determined by their numbers. So if you have numbers, if you are huge, a huge group, then you can expect that your influence will be greater in society compared to a group that is very small with a very small number. Competition for influence creates countervailing power. So it accepts that interest groups have power to influence policy. So the group model says that the groups in society are the ones who influence policy. So for example, the TUC has significant influence in what government does, particularly in relation to labor issues. And the TUC can make important threats that will force government to rescind some of the decisions it has taken in relation to the labor market. It is democratic because it allows room for competing and diverse ideas in policy making. Then groups can offer resistance to policies they do not favor. So different groups in society will decide, well, this is a policy government is putting across, but we don't like it. We can take different actions to make sure that this policy does not see the light of day. For example, groups can strike, groups can protest, groups can petition, groups can go on demonstration. And these are all mechanisms to ensure that what they don't want will not come to play as policy. Now, what are the weaknesses of the group model? The first point here is that the model has minimal value in communist and developing countries where associational life is circumscribed. Now, what it means is that here in developing countries, even though we have groups, in the past we have been ruled by military dictatorships. And the military dictatorship prevented associational life, that is groups, from forming because it was always afraid that with group formation, they may help to plot against the government. So associational life was not permitted at all, or if it was permitted, they really monitored whatever you did. It belittles the role played by public officials in policy making. If you tend to think that public policy is only a struggle between groups, then what is the use of government? What is the use of bureaucrats? But bureaucrats play an important role in public policy making, not only in developing the policy, but also in implementing the policy. So to assume that bureaucrats do not have a role in public policy making is to belittle the role of these government agencies. Then the next point is unbridled group struggle can disrupt policy making and subsequently result in conflict. If we allow groups unrestrained to go about conflicting with each other, struggling with each other, then there may not be an end point. And this will lead to continuous conflict. And that is why leaving policy to be in the hands of groups and let them decide what the society really wants will not be a healthy way to make public policy for the generality of the population. The next point is policies may reflect sectional interest to the neglect of the public interest. And we have already said that public interest is the interest of the generality of the population. But sectional interest is the interest of a few people, interest of few selfish individuals, interest of influential people, interest of rich people. That is sectional interest. So public interest, policy may reflect sectional interest to the neglect of public. So if we allow groups to struggle and the groups that wins, their policies or their desires become public policy, then it means that the policy of the land is the policy of the interest group. And that may conflict with what society in general really wants. It is too idealistic in stating that power is widely shared. That is not the case. So power is not widely shared. Power is concentrated somewhere, and the state alone has the coercive use of force. Now, the next one is what we call the systems model. The systems model starts with the premise that rather than the structure of the policy machinery, policy making according to the model is conceptualized in terms of inputs. And the inputs mean demands or claims that we make on government. These demands are converted into policy choices. The choices translate into outputs, which we call policy outcome. Then there must be feedback on policy outcome, and that is fed into the political system. The feedback ignites a fresh round of policy making processes. So what all this means is that in any system, there must be a set of inputs that we call demands. Then there must be a transformation system, and this transformation system puts these inputs through and convert them into policy outputs, which we call policies. And then once the policies come out, we consume them. We may make our opinion as to whether we like the policies that have come out or not. If we don't like them, then it goes back into the system again, passes through the transformation process, and a fresh round of policies are made. What are the characteristics of the systems model? Number one, the political system is composed of the identifiable and interrelated institutions and their activities. So each of the systems are made up of institutions, and the institutions have their activities. Inputs into the political system from the environment consists of demands and support. So we as citizens, we are supposed to tell government what we want, but we must also support government in prosecuting the issues and turning them into policy outputs for us to consume. The second point is that the environment consists of all those conditions and events external to the political system. So the political environment is the context or the setting in which public policy is made. The next point is that support is rendered when groups and individuals abide by election results and pay taxes. So the way we can support government to make policy is that we vote government into power, we pay our taxes, every responsibility we must carry out as citizens, we need to carry them out for there to be support for policies government wants to implement. The last point here is citizens accept the decisions of the authoritative political system in response to the demand. So whatever decisions that the system comes out with, we are obliged to accept them as the policies of the land. The concept of feedback indicates that public policies may subsequently alter the environment and may also alter the demands from the environment. Now, so what it means is that feedback is important to know that, yes, these are the policies we want, or to say that, no, these are not the policies that we want, or to say that, well, these policies are inadequate, or to say that, well, this needs to be added. So the feedback is important so that the policymakers know what is wrong and what needs to be done to correct the system so that the system works efficiently and effectively. Point two, the character of the political system may produce new demands. So as we consume goods and services produced, we demand fresh goods and services in the form of policy. The demands lead to further policy outputs in continuous, never-ending flow of public policy. The systems theory sees public policy in a cyclical manner. Cyclical manner in the sense that once one round of policy is completed, there's a fresh round of policy making again, because we always continuously demand something, or we find fault with the original policy or existing policies that have been formulated for us. So what are the advantages of the systems model? The first point is that it is an ingenious and innovative simplification of a rather complex relationship. In fact, public policy making is not only complex, but it is also dynamic, made up of several actors, several institutions, several processes, several disjunctions. But we tend to think that by the systems model, it has so simplified the way public policy is made. And that is why we say that it is a simplified innovation of how public policy is made. The second point is that it's an innovative simplification. The third point is that it recognizes the interrelationship between the political system and other systems. In every society, there are a number of systems. There's a political system, there's an economic system, there's a technological system, and all these systems must relate to be able to let society function very, very well. And therefore, the political system cannot operate in isolation. It has to operate in relationship to these other systems that exist within society. The feedback loop creates a cycle which serves as a learning process. So the learning process helps us to know that if we have fed back a wrong thing and we say that we don't like this, then it tells government that, look, well, this policy is not good. Let's find a way to change it. And that is the learning curve. It furnishes a panoramic view of how policies are made in democratic societies. Now, what are the weaknesses of the systems model? The first point is it is too simple and has oversimplified a highly complex political process. And we have said it. So public policy making is a complex business. It involves a lot of actors with different interests, and these interests conflict rather than converge. It involves a number of structures and substructures. It involves a lot of players operating at both national, regional, district, sub-district levels, and all these make it a complex merge. For you to think that it is only a simple process of sending inputs through a transformation system, then it comes out. It's much more complex than that. The second point is that it gives a pseudo impression of rationality and objectivity, which is erroneous. In fact, the system model is not rational because even those who make policies, their issues, their proposals, their ideas are tempered by their values, their interests, and their hopes. So it cannot be objective. The third point, the conversion process in the black box is highly ambiguous and vague. So if we talk about the transformation process, and the transformation process is what we refer to as the black box, what really happens in the transformation process, nobody really sees. And that is why we say that it is a black box. It's a black box because the transformation process is not seen by anybody. Nobody knows how the process really works and how it turns out the outputs. And that's why we call it the black box. We need to know what is in the black box so that we know the mechanisms by which the inputs are turned into outputs. The next point is that the conversion process does not indicate whether the feedback is actually taken into account. So you have a feedback loop, but we are not told whether this feedback they are giving is actually being made use of or not. We don't know. Political systems are not closely interrelated, as the model suggests. So there may be systems that are there, but they are not related to what we really want. So we have come to the end of this fourth session. And in this fourth session, I've tried to outline a number of models in the descriptive category. I have talked about the elite model, I've talked about the group model, I've talked about the public, the other models. So all these models tell us how policy ought to be made, how policy is actually made, not how policy ought to be made, like in the prescriptive category. And I hope that these models will also be very, very influential, particularly in practical problem-solving situations. Thank you.